May I ask how that Phoenix weather is doing?
Oh, it's pretty glorious. I'm like, it's a really like a nice amount of sunshine. I
Are you
cannot.
in Phoenix or no?
I
Or
am. I'm in
okay.
Phoenix, Arizona, in downtown
May
Phoenix,
I ask how
Arizona.
that Phoenix weather is doing?
It's beautiful. Oh, it's pretty glorious. I'm like, it's a
I'm definitely jealous, just so you know.
That's like if we had more time, we could live forever. Just you and I, we could be together. That's life. If we had more time, we could live forever. Just you and I, we could be together. That's life. We can play like children play. We can say like children say. Just you and I, having up the time. We can wise when we grow old. Get slow when we grow old. Just you and I, having up the time. Do you know? Here we go. That's life. If we have more time, we can live forever. Just you and I, we can be together. That's life. If we have more time, we can live forever. Just you and I, we can be together. That's life. We can run like children run. We can time like children time. Just you and I, having up the time. Make a plan for when we old. Reminisce when we get old. Just you and I, having up the time. Do you know? Here we go. That's life.
I'm gonna jump right on in here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Hicks. We are doing another Lunch and Learn. This Lunch and Learn, we got some awesome people on our panel. This is about interrupting the school, the prison pipeline, the SR, the SRO uh, debate. Again, my name is Aaron Hicks. I am the reentry coordinator of Nehemiah. And I'll have my panelists jump right in. How about a quick intro, who you are, what you do in our school districts?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Ali Muldrow. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the co-executive director of the Gay Straight Alliance for Safe Schools, GSAFE. I am currently the Madison Metropolitan School District Board of Education President. I'm serving my second term in office, so my term ends in 2025. I ran for school board the first time in 2017. I have 3 daughters, 2 of whom are at school here at MMSD. So I have a 1-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 12-year-old. I have an O'Keefe student in 7th grade, and I have a 3rd grader at Lowell Elementary School. And I'm really grateful to be part of this conversation with y'all.
Thank you, President Muldrow, for that. My name is David Hart. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I couldn't have picked better walk-in or walk-up music than you all did, Aaron. And so, Mr. Hicks, I'm grateful for that. I'm a product of this school district, and I have 2 children that are products of this school district as well. My spouse is also an alumni of this district. I serve as the special assistant to Superintendent Dr. Carlton D. Jenkins, the superintendent of Madison Metropolitan School Districts, but I believe the capacity in which I was invited to speak today is as my capacity as a pastor of Sherman Church, an open and affirming church on the north side. It's a growing church on the north side, but I have had experience in the criminal justice system. I have been a prosecutor for 17 years, mostly on sexual assault and domestic violence issues. And I'm grateful to be with you here generally, but particularly with my co-panelist who has a particular expertise in these areas.
We greatly appreciate having you guys here, and it's a blessing. So I'm going to just jump right in here with a little backdrop. And please feel free to correct me if anything does not sound accurate, but this is my understanding of the history of the SRO. School resource officers programs began in the 50s and 60s as schools began to integrate and to improve community relationships between youth and police. Government funding for the program skyrocketed in the 90s in response to school shootings like Columbine. Data has shown that Black students and students with disabilities are far more likely to be disciplined or arrested at schools compared to white students and students without disabilities. The Madison Metro School District has had police officers in all 4 schools since the mid-90s. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
I can take an amen too.
An amen.
That sounds about right. I'm not sure I'm willing to amen kind of the criminalization of Black students and disabled students, and particularly Black students.
I'm definitely not amen in that either, but definitely I just want to make sure the information I'm giving is accurate.
But what I will say is we had police officers in our 4 comprehensive high schools and in 2 middle schools in Madison. We currently do not have school-based policing in our schools. The program existed in our high schools for 18 years. And over the course of that 18 years, the majority of the students who were arrested every single year for 18 years were African-American students with disabilities.
Wow. Wow, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Just letting the people know. I'm going to jump in with a quick question. This question for you, Dr. Hart. Can you define the school to prison pipeline? What role, if any, do school resource officers play in that pipeline?
Absolutely. I certainly can give some context to our discussion about the school to prison pipeline. I from my perspective, it's a peculiar trend or phenomenon. And when I say peculiar, I mean it the way that the founders of this country meant peculiar as they described the Constitution or even the Underground Railroad. It's a peculiar trend where young people they're funneled out of public schools and into the juvenile criminal justice system or the adult criminal justice system. We know that most of those youths are Black and brown. They have disabilities. They're They identify as queer or LGBTQ plus. They have histories of poverty, abuse, neglect, and they would benefit from resources like restorative justice programs or additional resources from the schools. But they're isolated, they're punished, and they're pushed out. The advent of this reached perhaps its zenith in maybe 20 years ago or so, where we started we were continuing our tough on crime, zero tolerance policies outside of the schools, but also inside of the schools, where school officials and administrators would criminalize minor offenses and infractions of school rules, while police in the schools would make arrests or refer these young brown and Black children to the justice system, and they'd criminalize their behavior instead of handling it within the school district. We know that the pipeline, the prison pipeline from school begins with inadequate resources in public schools. We know that our state legislature is not adequately funding Wisconsin schools, but we know that's where it begins. We know that we know the research tells us that overcrowded classrooms adds to this, lack of teachers who are able to culturally impact and relate to our Black and brown children, insufficient funding for extra programs and extra things like counselors. It's unbelievable that I have to call those things extra, but special education programs and services, textbooks, they kind of put our children in a place where they're disadvantaged from the outset. But we also know that let me see how to say this. There's no evidence or indicia that Black students or brown students act out any more frequently than their white peers. We know that even though the research doesn't bear that out, Black students are sent to the criminal justice system from school at a higher rate than their white colleagues. That they account for about 70% of all police referrals from the high school. I believe the number is currently that Black and brown students are about 3 times more likely to receive a referral. We know that suspensions are the #1 indicator of success rates and graduation rates, more than poverty, more than any other issue. So this is the context in which we find ourselves in this school to prison pipeline.
Thank you for that. I'm going to also ask you that same question, but I want to add a little bit more to it. What I want to put on it for you is then what is the agenda? I do want to still ask you the same question, but ultimately then by creating this school of prison pipeline, what is the real agenda behind this?
I think that's a really important question, and I want to thank Pastor Hart for his response to the question. I think the school to prison pipeline starts in early childhood. And it starts with who gets in trouble the most, who is excluded from opportunity, who is reprimanded publicly, who's humiliated in class, who is overrepresented in special education. There's a lot that goes into making Black students feel like intellectually they are less than the rest of the kids at school. And that doesn't just give the Black students that impression, that gives everybody at the school that impression. And that starts really early. And there's a lot of things that go into it, including the ways we talk to our Black students and also the ways we come into contact with our Black students. So our Black students are the most likely students to be restrained and secluded at school, which really mirrors incarceration, right, in a lot of ways. So what is kind of the agenda behind this, right? We live in the United States of America. Nobody incarcerates more people. No country on earth incarcerates more people, period, than the United States of America. No country on earth has sentenced more children to die in prison than the United States of America. And the vast majority of those kids are African American. So we can talk about disproportionality at the adult level. But what we don't talk about often is that our juvenile system is far more disproportionately African American than our adult incarceration system, right? So it's not a coincidence in a country that enslaved Black people, right? And slavery was birth to death, that the same children who were told that they were unfit for freedom and unfit for education are still being kicked out of class and are still losing their freedom as children. I believe fundamentally that incarceration is developmentally inappropriate for children. In the state of Wisconsin, a 10-year-old child can be tried as an adult, can be treated as an adult in court, can be criminalized as an adult, a kid as young as 10 years old. And I believe that most people don't think incarceration is right for children. That's why we don't do it to the vast majority of children. And we really target the children that we have a historical relationship with that has been these children are disposable or less than in comparison to other children. There's also the adultification of Black students, right? The idea that Black students are somehow more responsible or more equipped to make decisions that other kids are not. So when one kid makes a mistake, it's treated as a child making a mistake. And when Black children make a mistake, they're treated as dangerous and bad. And there's also this idea that Black children don't need to be protected, but that the community needs to be protected from Black children. And that goes a long way in terms of how we relate to our kids at school. If we see Black students as a threat or as a nuisance or as disruptive, we treat them as a threat, as disruptive, as a nuisance. And that starts in 4K. You know, right here in Madison, we have a district where when we were allowing people to suspend children at the elementary school level, every single child who was suspended from 4K was a Black boy. And that says something about how we think about Black boys who are 4 years old, you know? And so there's a lot to talk about in terms of how we got there and why we got there. What's the agenda of mass incarceration? Well, the agenda of mass incarceration has always been to exploit the labor of people who are incarcerated, right? So that links us back to our history.
Oh, thank you. And I guess when I posed the question as far as agenda, and it's for either one of you, more importantly, I'm really asking the agenda for our education. So let me give it to you like this. Everything that you guys are talking about, I'm a product of. I've been in ED classes, so I understand all of these dynamics. I've lived it. I've been in prison, so I understand these dynamics as well. But with that being said, I guess I'm really genuinely, wholeheartedly asking, is the agenda about educating at all? And that's really what I want to know.
I think that the emphasis on academic achievement for Black students has been sabotaged by the emphasis of policing the behavior of Black students, of reprimanding Black students, of keeping Black students out of school. And I think what we know is that suspension doesn't actually produce good outcomes. Discipline we haven't been going, oh, well, we reprimand these students more. And because of that, these students are less likely to be incarcerated. They're more likely to go to college. They're more likely to be engaged in schools. We know that the practices that we've engaged in with Black students have a negative impact. And yet people continue to be deeply committed to those practices and to target Black students for those practices. And that's one of the reasons I was really passionate about removing officers from schools, because there wasn't going to be this kind of magical moment where people said, oh, wait, this isn't working and it's harmful to this group of students. We're going to stop utilizing our officers in this way. That never happened in 18 years. So you have to eliminate the practice, right? And if you're talking about disproportionality is a mathematical concept, right? So there's two ways to resolve it. Either you can stop arresting Black students at school, or you can start arresting white students and other students for similar infractions. I have never thought that incarceration is right for any child, no matter what they look like. And that includes my children, right? That includes Black children. So I think, my goal is to make sure that students have the ability to use school to gain the skills that they need to achieve their dreams, that all of our students have a sense of their intelligence and their intellectual value as they make their way through our educational system. But I don't think our schools right now are a reflection of that goal. And I do think that we have a lot of work to do. I think it's one of the reasons that Dr. Jenkins created a eliminated suspension at the elementary school level last year, was that getting rid of the police, that's one step, right? But I tell folks all the time, we create this dynamic for Black students and for our young people at the elementary school level. And then we pretend to address it when they are young adults. I think the damage has been done oftentimes. And so really getting to where does this start for our young people and addressing the phenomena that impact our young people in early childhood and elementary school and primary education. I think this is another reason why full day 4K is incredibly important and why our administration, our superintendent championed that work. But we have a lot of work to do if we want to place the emphasis on academic success instead of behavior for Black young people.
I think the aim, Mr. Hicks, is the same as it was in the 1850s here in Wisconsin, to prepare young folks for the world. But there's also a component of preparing the world for them, and I think that's a noble it's a noble pursuit, but somehow. When we have Black and brown children in the calculus, that's not realized for any number of reasons. President Muldrow is right on that. There's no benefit to having expulsions. There's no benefit. We know that statistically and empirically, there's nothing but harm that comes to students who are suspended, who are disciplined. They're not only ostracized, but they're made to feel they're otherized even. And so I believe that the goal is the same as it was in the 1850s. Whether we have to realize that, and we have to ensure that all of our children are learning and getting prepared for the world, but also that the world is becoming prepared for them.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you guys kindly. To our president, we have a question. The question is: the MMSD school board resisted calls to end the SRO contract for years. what led the board to end the contract in 2001, or I'm sorry, in 2021? And do you feel that was the right call? I think she jumped out. Um, but I can throw that over to you to just see what's your thoughts behind that.
The if I understand the question was that there was some
There was a lot of
hesitation.
resistance. Yeah, it was a
Sure.
lot of resistance about taking the SROs out of the school. But in 2021, they finally did. And I guess the question is, what led the board to end the contract? And do you feel that was the right call?
Indeed, no one. I don't think anyone can answer that question quite as skillfully as the Black woman can do that. What I will say is, as a Madisonian who lived through that and had children attend this school through that, I believe that there was hesitance because there was a belief that there was political might behind the notion of SROs. Rather than taking the time to explain why SROs are not helpful in the schools and actually harmful in many respects, it's easier to put them in there and satisfy political, a political component. What I believe what led to them being removed, I think, quite frankly, there were the mobilization of Black and Brown young folk and allies who attended board meetings, showed out, and articulated that not only were they not going to stand for SROs, but they were, offering some substantive plans for keeping them out and a path forward. So I think that's why it occurred from my perspective.
Yeah, definitely. No, I get it. I get it. Since it's just you and I at this moment,
Yeah,
let me ask you this then. What just and this is just your own perspective, but
indeed.
where does that leave our children now, as far as academically? Like, do we match up to other states? I mean, like, I believe this is probably more of a universal, meaning throughout other states, some similar things going on. But I
Indeed.
guess the academically though, where does this leave our children? How do we, you know what I mean? Because we hear it, we even hear it in songs that our children are the future. Um, but I guess if not, if not educated right, where does that leave us? Like, where does that leave our children?
Indeed, I think it leaves our children in a place where we're searching for answers. I think it leaves parents in the same position. We have some of the most dire metrics revolving around graduations, proficiency, and suspensions, expulsions in the state and even in the nation, and so I think it leaves us searching for answers. Quite frankly, I'm particularly interested to, if I don't want to put President Muldrow on the spot, but she posed a couple of questions that I think she's uniquely positioned to speak to.
Y'all, I apologize because I lost internet question for just a moment. So do you mind, Erin, rephrasing the questions you asked?
Yeah, no, not at all. That's not a problem at all. So the question that was asked is, the MMSD school board resisted calls to end the SRO contract for years. What led the board to end the contract in 2021? And do you feel that was the right call?
I think in 2021, the kind of really horrific incident that was George Floyd's murder at the hands of the police is a public execution that lasted for 10 minutes. And I think that the idea that our students would walk around with officers in the building and feel safe was something we had to look at in a different way as a board. I had advocated for the police to not be in schools long before I was on the school board, long before I was on the Board of Education in Madison. But I think for other board members who, navigate a different identity or a different, relationship to law enforcement than I do, I think seeing something like George Floyd was a real shift in their perception of how the police impact our young people and what our young people think that police officers represent. For me, as somebody who has grown up in Madison and has had, really heartbreaking experiences with law enforcement, including the way I've seen my father treated, the way I've seen my brother treated, the way I've been treated. I wasn't surprised by George Floyd. I was deeply saddened and heartbroken by what George Floyd went through. But I was 5 years old when Rodney King happened. And so the brutalization of Black people at the hands of law enforcement was something I was deeply and personally familiar with. And I think that, we as a society have to have a real relationship with truth and reconciliation when it comes to, what law enforcement has represented to the Black community and what law enforcement has perpetrated against Black people. And I think that we were able to have that conversation in 2021 because of the level of brutality that George Floyd experienced and the way in which it was documented and circulated around the world.
I really appreciate that. And I think the other part that I did ask, I'm really, I don't know. This could just be a me thing, but I really want to know, like, where does that lead our kids? Like, what happens with our children? Because, like, for example, I'll give you an example what I mean. I don't know about you guys, but I went to school in Madison as well. But my question is, like, for example, I've grown up my whole life learning that, like, for example, Christopher Columbus discovered America. And in a lot of ways we still push that. So I'm just wondering, like, I mean, where does that put our children? Because I mean, if these things are not accurate information, yet we still push it, and we put anytime we don't want to address something, we use words like it's political, um, instead of just saying it's wrong and we need to make our wrongs right. So I guess, I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like our children are so vulnerable, um, and there's so much misleading information, and um, and then they're more focused on our behavior than us ever getting an education. So I mean, like, where does that leave these children? I mean, what happens with them? And is there another narrative that is either being pushed or could be pushed that would, have some better outcomes?
I love that question, and I think it's an incredibly important question. And I want to thank you for focusing us in on what Black students need. I think the thing about Madison is we know what works well for kids, just like we know what doesn't work for kids. We know what works really well for kids. We know that white male students are the young people who say that they feel the most welcomed and encouraged at school. Right? We have data that verifies that. And there's a lot of things that go into that for white men. It's not because the majority of our teachers are white men, right? The majority of our teachers are not. They don't share every element of a white male identity. Now, the majority of our teachers are white, and we do know that white students benefit from seeing themselves represented by their educators. But what we also know is, even if a teacher is not a white man, our curriculum values white men. So if you go into an English class, the author of the book is a white man, the main character in the book is a white man, and all of that tells you that you are important, that you are valid. You go to your math class, you'll study the contributions that white men have made to the areas of mathematics. If you go to an art class, you'll see the exact same thing, right? And so in every area that you study, your identity is relevant and important, and that works. You're given the benefit of the doubt when you make a mistake, or if you have a consequence for making a mistake, that consequence is designed to benefit you. I'll give you an example. I have a good friend who got in trouble when he was a young person for stabbing another student with a pencil, right? He's like 6 or 7 years old. And his school didn't suspend him. They had a meeting with his parents. His parents decided that he needed to go to therapy and develop better communication skills. That communication skill emphasis that he was given, that intervention, benefits him to this day. When he was in high school, he made another mistake. He shot off a BB gun in an open space where somebody could have gotten hurt. It was a serious thing. He was really fortunate that nobody got hurt. Somebody called the police because they thought he had fired a gun. When the police got there, they didn't arrest him. They took him home. And their response was to give him an opportunity to work for the courts, making videos. Now he is a documentary filmmaker. So when he had a consequence, that consequence, instead of punitive punishment, he got an opportunity. And he got an opportunity because his parents had the resources to advocate for him in that way. We need to start doing that for our young people. But what I don't want to do is paint Black students with one brush. Right? Because there are lots of Black students who have all kinds of relationships with discipline, with engagement at school. And so I think what we have to start doing is looking at Black children as children and treating Black children when they make mistakes like a kid who made a mistake, and giving Black students the benefit of the doubt. What we also need to do is start really looking at our curriculum in a way that uplifts the identities of all children and doesn't emphasize that one group of people is more important or has a greater contribution intellectually to what we're studying at school. And so I think, this idea like we don't know what to do, we absolutely know what to do. We know that it makes more sense to give a parent a good job than to spend $100,000 a year incarcerating their kid. Right? So we have all of these resources. In Wisconsin, we spend more on incarceration than anything else. And we know that if we took those same resources and put them into housing and put them into employment and put them into education, that we would live in a smarter society and a safer society. So this is about how we invest in our young people. This is how we invest in our communities.
No,
President Muldrow she's absolutely right. This is precisely why certain communities don't ever have to have discussions about defunding the police. They have systems set up in suburbs and exurbs, and even in some places in our cities, particularly here in Madison, in which the things that President Muldrow she's saying are bearing themselves out. That when a white child, a white male child, well, first of all, there's grounding and centering in the curriculum, in the society, in the world. They make buildings with centering white men and centering whiteness. There's our entire construct is built around things that otherize us. But when white children get in trouble, they're sent home, or they're driven home, or they have a shop teacher, or they have other folks who say that this is a child making a childish decision, and they're redirected in a way that benefits and helps them. When our children make those same mistakes, they're suspended, they're expelled. We know that the data supports that. So we've been having these discussions for several years, but that's it just brings to bear why we don't talk about defunding the police or in other areas, or taking SROs out of suburban communities and school districts, because they're equipped to handle their students differently.
I appreciate that. I'm going to go into the chat and grab some questions, but I do want to throw something out there. There was something based on just this discussion. So I get an opportunity to speak with police, sometimes at the police academy and so on and so forth. And something that, like you were talking about, you don't advocate for suspension, right? And I don't advocate for shooting people, right? Like I think that should be, I mean, if that's necessary, but a lot of times these situations that's not necessary, though it still happens. And so something I said to the police, but I really meant this wholeheartedly. I'm not advocating shooting anyone, but if we're gonna shoot people, I'm just wondering, can we shoot some white people, some Asian people, some other people outside of? I shouldn't always turn on the news or something and see, the police then shot another black person. Like, I don't understand that dynamic. Like, when you see the guy walking with the militant gun and no one says anything to him at all, these are things that I think they're just mind blowing. So I we don't use that. There's not a universal thing that's taking place. It just seems as if, the agenda is solely on black and brown people, and that really is disturbing to me. And it really, I think it's mind-boggling that we even having this conversation, because we should be talking about their education, and we haven't even got there yet. So I want to jump in just and grab a couple of these. Here's a question. It says, based on the current WISE data, I'm concerned about students earning public school credits and premature graduation certificates while demonstrating basic and below basic levels of literacy. How are school to prison pipeline statistics impacted by the literacy data? How would raising the bar of literacy impact the discussion around SROs in our school? Does illiteracy contribute to expanding funnel what captures too many students of color? I'm not sure what SWD means. And students living with neurodiversity. I believe there's plenty of research that lower levels of literacy are directly connected with referrals. Doesn't ignoring and tolerating these levels of literacy reinforce and strengthen the pipeline?
I think this is such a powerful and important question, because I think it's an idea that people in Madison really like. People in Madison really like the idea that Black students are incapable of reading and are graduating without the ability to read. I don't think that our test scores tell us about whether or not a child can read. I think that our average student can use a cell phone, can get directions, can engage with a book, can read articles online. What our test scores tell us is how our kids feel about their test, how our kids feel about their school. And I think the desire to use standardized testing, particularly against Black students, is by design, right? Like those tests as a gatekeeper to who is intellectually capable and isn't about benefiting students. It isn't about proving better results. When we talk about disproportionality in discipline, we have to also talk about disproportionality in opportunity. So our Black students are the most likely students to be suspended. They're also the least likely students to be recognized as talented and gifted. So what does that tell you? It tells me that when a student performs really well, nobody notices. So how long do you keep doing that? How long do you keep giving it your all if you're a second grader or a third grader or a fourth grader when you know your teacher doesn't care about that? Your teacher is more vested in reprimanding you than ever noticing that you are profoundly gifted in the area of mathematics. For everything that is disproportionately negative that Black students are disproportionately represented, they are underrepresented in something that is positive. They are underrepresented in advanced learning. They are underrepresented in arts opportunities. They're underrepresented in theater. They're underrepresented in almost every positive opportunity our school has to offer. So I don't think this is about what Black students can do. And I think people would love for this to be about our kids, but it's not. This is about the adults and what the adults are doing and the impact of discriminating against a child. Discriminating against anybody is demoralizing. Discriminating against a child is devastating. You know, if you have somebody cut you down before your self-esteem has legs to stand on. I went to school here too. I graduated from East High School in 2005. I went to Sherman Middle School when there was a police officer there, and at East High School when there was a police officer there. I started my education at Emerson Elementary School, and I tell folks on a regular basis, it was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my life. I still struggle with what happened to me in elementary school, with the way I was treated in elementary school. And so I think we wish the conversation was about the achievement gap, right? Because then the onus is on the kid. What we don't want the conversation to be about is discrimination at school and the impact discrimination at school has. And I think that there's a lot that folks will do to derail the conversation about what discrimination at school actually means.
Can I just jump in one quick second? Let me ask you this then, since you said that, I want to know the why piece. Why as adults do we not want to? Why we don't want to look at us?
I love that question. I love
And
that.
why? Well, it's two parts to it. One, why do we want to look at us? But the second part is why would we want to solely put the responsibility on the children when it's on us to be able to educate these children the most effective way possible? And obviously, for every child, there's some differences, right? But we're supposed to be specifically, and it's not a shot at the UW, but it's supposed to be a prestige, college, so on and so forth. I'm trying to understand. We have all of these educated people. Why are we putting the responsibility on the children versus us? So yeah, I just wanted to put that in the mix.
I think it's a lot easier to tell a child that they're not well behaved than to tell an adult you're discriminating against a certain group of children. I think it's a lot easier to say it's on these kids than to say, actually, we've recognized a pattern of adults treating certain kids differently. Because I think, what does that say about you? What does it say about you if you are discriminating against children, right? What kind of person are you? And I think we have a hard time admitting that there is a problem with white supremacy, right? I go back to James Baldwin. Why do you need racism, right? White supremacy, I like to say the mythology of white supremacy. Because if you are superior, you don't need racism, you outcompete. You don't have to sabotage anybody, you outcompete. So what happens when there's a level playing field? Well, if you grew up in the 1950s or 60s and you saw the integration of sports, what happens when there's a level playing field is that people people start losing their jobs. The people who used to dominate an area no longer can, because they have to compete on an even playing field with folks who have been left out. And I think folks in America could accept that for sports, because that feeds into a certain stereotype about the Black body. Now, if we integrate academia, then we are defying a stereotype about the Black intellect. And people are really afraid of that, because if you see Black people as intellectually valid and Black people have a seat at that table, well, then maybe you aren't at that table. Maybe you don't get that unfair advantage. And so a conversation about discrimination against Black students is also a conversation about the preferential treatment of other students.
Dr. Maisha and Lawrence Wynn make this exact argument that you've made, Mr. Hicks, that if children are not learning, then it's not their fault. It rests with the educators and the society. I'll simply add that 85% of the individuals, of the juveniles, of the young people who have interaction with the criminal justice system are functionally illiterate. What did they do? What goes into that calculus to make it so that they're responsible for their own illiteracy when we have a system set up that's supposed to educate them and provide resources for them. So I certainly just wanted to point out that this is your musings are something that folks have been contemplating for a while, particularly that couple who does a lot of work in restorative justice.
No, I appreciate that. This is actually really good, man. I appreciate it. I'm gonna throw another question out here from the chat. Let's see. So she says, I appreciate you. I appreciate the response talking about seclusion and restraint data to the schools to prison pipeline. My question is, the data showed there was a 20% increase in SRO incidents for students with disabilities. There were also a 10% increase in the use of SROs for white students with disabilities. What do you think are the root causes for the dramatic increase of seclusion and restraints for students that do not identify as African American or Black?
I want to be frank with you right now and say I'm not really familiar with the data this person is referencing. So I'm not sure if they're referencing broader data beyond MMSD, because we haven't had SROs in the last couple school years. And I also think that overwhelmingly the most recent data I've been exposed to through the district is that our restraint and seclusion numbers dropped significantly last year, but they were still incredibly disproportionately African-American students who were restrained and secluded at the greatest rate. Now, seclusion and restraint overall did not increase. So I'm curious about where that data comes from. And I think I'd be able to speak to it a little bit better if I was more familiar with the data that is being referenced in that question.
Yeah, that came from Anna Moffett. So let me grab another question out of it. Well, do that. What I want to do is, because one thing we have not talked about that I think is appropriate for this conversation, and that's dollars and cents. You know, because I mean, we got a capital in every state, so we understand that this country operates off capital. With that being said, aside from the cost of SROs, the security budget for MMSD rose from 60,000 in 91 to over 800,000 in 2020. Why do you think we saw that big jump over 30 years?
Our investment in safety in the last 30 years, I think, has been dictated by a series of factors. I think that our relationship to gun violence, as reported by our media, our relationship to school shootings, which was something that really became a major area of concern when I was in school. So Columbine happened when I was in sixth grade. You saw things like intercom entry points. You've seen more surveillance footage in schools. You've seen a greater investment in mental health. I think there are some positive things that we have really invested in terms of school safety. And I also think that we have invested in the criminalization of children to a greater extent. So that same 30-year span that you're talking about is kind of the greatest boom in mass incarceration in the history of the United States. And it's not a coincidence that our investment in safety has mirrored our overall community's investment in safety, or our concern for safety. I also think the rhetoric around law and order and crime is really fueling a lot of the way we relate to school safety. We live in a really safe community. Dane County has an average of 7 homicides a year. The majority of those homicides are domestic violence. If we really want to talk about safety in our community, then we have to have a real conversation about domestic violence and the exposure our students have to that, and what that means for a young person growing up. But I think, there has been strategic investments in safety. And then I think there's also been investments in safety that are really based on kind of the trends, right? And if somebody is selling you the idea that an intercom will keep your kids safe from a mass shooter, then people would buy anything, would invest in anything to have some sense that nobody's going to walk into their building and shoot their child. The truth is, Sandy Hook had an intercom entrance, right? The truth is that schools that have had school shootings have had police officers at the schools when those shootings have happened. You know what effectively stops school gun laws? If you restrict who has access to guns or the kinds of guns people have access to, that is an effective way to keep people safe. But because we don't have that, we are willing to invest in symbolic safety, things that make us feel safe, but don't necessarily promote safety actually.
Well, that's real good. That's real good. Let me just see. I just want to let our listeners know that we did have 2 other panelists that were supposed to be here. For whatever reason, they were not able to attend. So that's why it is just us 3 here. I know that there are other lenses that people really want to put out there. So, but nevertheless, again, we had to keep going. And so I want to jump into another question. So someone posed this question. Why can't more of these like basically these anecdotes or these conversations be part of BOE discussions? The story gave a concrete example of how to do things right. I'm not sure our school community is committed to embracing right way to respond to behaviors. Um, when you were talking and I want you to jump right in, but when you were talking about safety, the first thing came to my mind is prior to, safety, I was just thinking like, if we're talking about safety, how would education not be a part of the conversation? Because if we're educating people the right way and doing things uh, kind of back to the question at hand, right, however we, look at this, and making sure that people are getting the education they need, um, how could you exclude that from safety? Because that's part of the safety. But I guess to this question that the person was posing, I'm not for sure what BOE discussion is. So you would have to, if you guys know what that is, be more interesting to find out what that's about.
So the Board of Education is BOE, and Board of Education discussions, governance discussions are really held within the parameters of three things, the three functions of the board. So the board approves the budget. That means the board has a say in every dollar spent by this district. We spend over $500 million a year on education in Madison, Wisconsin. So the conversation about resources is a complex conversation about resources because as far as the rest of the state goes, we're one of the most resource-rich districts in the state. And that's just the reality of where we are at MMSD. The other thing the board does is pass policy, right? So we can have a conversation within the realm of policy, which is why we had the conversation about, what it looks like to have a behavior education plan and our move away from exclusionary practices. And that conversation is a lot about what we should stop doing. And the conversation we need to have is also has to be about what we should start doing, okay? So that's a little bit about where I think as board president, we need to go. It's not just what we can't keep doing, it's also gotta be, how do we start doing the right thing for students? How do we start to recover trust in our schools? The other thing we do is we manage the superintendent. And I think the board made a really strategic decision in investing in the leadership of Dr. Carlton Jenkins. I think Dr. Jenkins, is a real leader on in terms of resolving the achievement gap, in terms of making sure that all students have access to academic rigor. I think he has led the way for the board to have more of these conversations and to have them constructively.
Let me just get another question out of here for you guys. And Dr. Hart, please feel free to jump right in.
I think President Muldrow articulated those
She is.
matters.
I know.
Well,
she's awesome. She's awesome.
I'll just add that safety is as President Muldrow alluded to, is almost impossible to measure. What we're measuring is the attitude towards safety, or the feeling of safety. We can have 7 homicides in this community and still not feel safe. We can have a reduction of crime in 25%, or domestic violence cases of 30%, or whatever. If we don't feel safe, then that's what we're measuring. And I think that's where the budget numbers have come from, is to make people feel safer.
Here's a question. It says, was the removal of SROs in the MSDF, in MMSD, accompanied by addition of any other resources to help teachers constructively address behavioral issues?
That's a phenomenal question. Absolutely. So there was a greater investment in restorative justice. When we removed EROs, there was a greater investment in mental health. When we removed SROs, there was a greater investment in professional development and anti-racist training for teachers when we removed SROs. We were spending a little over $500,000 a year on SROs. So $500,000 is, $5 million is 1% of our budget. It's a really small portion of our budget to talk about what we can do with a little over $500,000 and 25,000 students at 53 schools and sites, right? But there has been a tremendous amount of resources and thought put into how do we create a new way of interacting and engaging with our students. I don't think we're done making those investments, but I think that we knew when we removed SROs from schools that we were going to need an alternative way to support students. And I think we have seen our administration really lead the way in prioritizing, making sure our young people have alternatives to incarceration, have ways to give back to the community when they make a mistake, have ways to really reconcile when someone has been harmed at school. We've got a lot of work left to do, but we've started that work.
First, I want to just thank you, Tara, for wishing me a happy birthday. I just want to throw out something. So in my world, it consists of a lot of reentry, working with individuals coming home from prison and jail. But one thing that we utilize, and I'm wondering, I think my personal opinion, this model should be used in every aspect of life, even to death, um, and that's peer support. Um, Utilizing individuals who come from that, who have experienced that, so for example, when a man or woman comes home from prison or jail, um, my goal and agenda is to be there with that individual, to walk with them until they feel comfortable or strong enough to walk on their own. Um, and so I'm just curious, for individuals, because I mean, at the end of the day, this still is about education, even though I know dollars and cents play a part in it. And there's a lot of cold word political reasons why we're not doing what we need to be doing. But do you think that could be something that could be beneficial, as far as in our school district, as far as where these young people have the support of individuals who, who may have graduated, or who, can utilize them as a means to help them navigate through. But so it's not all about behavior. People are actually having the opportunity to just focus in on education and nothing else. Um, is that something that you think could possibly be beneficial in some way, shape, or form in our school districts? Yeah, and that's for either one of you guys. So I mean, feel free to. And I don't know exactly how that would look, but I do think it. I think that when people see individuals who have made it to, like you guys made it to the other side, however you did it, you did it. And this is, this is where you are now. So, and I think it's just good to be able to see individuals make it to the other side. And so having some type of support, peer support in some way, shape, or form. And so I'm just kind of picking your brains now. What's your thoughts on that?
I think this is an excellent question. I want to open up the space for Pastor Hart to get to, chime in a little bit more in the conversation, but particularly regarding this question, because I think the importance of what we saw in our district, which was really a transformation of our leadership to be really more inclusive and more diverse. And I've seen that really impact students in schools when members of our administration who identify as Black men, have been out in our schools really working directly with young people to say, like, hey, what do you need? We got you. We're here for you. We see you. And I think that goes a long way. I think we have a lot of work to do to diversify our staff. I think it's a really important thing that students have Black teachers. There is a data point that goes around every single year that one Black teacher makes a Black student 50% more likely to graduate from high school. I don't believe my brother would have learned how to read in Madison if it wasn't for Angie Hicks, who was Miss Crawford when he was in third grade, being his teacher. So I think making sure that our students have mentors, making sure our students know that there are Black people throughout this district rooting for them and working in their interest is a really important part of this work. I also think for the first time in the history of this district, there are 4 people who identify as African American on the school board. We make up the majority of the board right now. That's never happened before. And all 4 of us graduated from MMSD. And I think that we have a real sense of what it means to go to school here, what it means to be young and Black and grow up in Madison. And I think that means that we get to have more candid conversations about, why our students feel the way they feel about school and how they're being treated at school. And so I agree with you completely that there is a need for peer support. There is a need for our students to see themselves represented in their faculty, represented in their administration, and represented in their curriculum. And before I finish my answer, I just want to give a huge shout out to Jeannie Ricker, who I know is in the audience right now. I really adore the child that you raised and brought into my life and into this world. And thank you for joining us and being part of this conversation. And thank you for being Katie's mom. She's amazing.
Mr. Hicks, I don't have much to add to that. We know that the data supports having peer support and that it works, and it works particularly well in all communities, and especially the Black community. The only point I'll add is that we have to be very careful that we're not using peer support to substitute for education, learning, teaching. The educators in our district need to have the cultural competency to teach and educate and lead and relate to our children as well. And President Muldrow's real push for Black teachers has just really been a game changer.
I know we're getting ready to wind down, but I do have a question. You know, I got all these questions in my head. But one question that I have is, so I do a lot of work with the UW, extremely a lot of work with them. And it's around research. And a lot of times you hear things, you hear rhetoric like evidence practice, you know, those type of, you know, that type of talk. My question to you guys, and maybe you can help me because I've never understood this. If data is showing some specific things about how to make things look better or do better, and we don't utilize the data, then my question is, what's the agenda then?
I really appreciate this question. And one of the things I tell folks all the time is that Harriet Tubman didn't need a pie chart to know that slavery was wrong, right? So when we talk about data right now, what we're talking about is an economic factor, right? Somebody gets paid to do that research, right? There's huge grants. There's a lot of money that goes in to, cultivating data or looking at data or data gazing. I think, why we like to collect data and not necessarily use that data to embrace best practice is because you can always continue to study something. You can always further investigate, right? And I think that we're actually caught in a pattern of investigating things that we know are wrong. We've known we're wrong for a very long time. And we actually know how to reconcile them because we're doing different things to different kids, right? And so we know that it works better to give a kid an opportunity or to get a kid more engaged in school than to kick them out, right? We know that that works, but we can keep researching how bad it is or how problematic it is or why it happens versus addressing the problem. And so I think sometimes our relationship to data, our relationship to gathering information is a barrier to correcting our behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me give you this one though, but I can't let y'all get off without this one. It says, first, I need to point out one huge. I don't know what they were trying to say.
Misnomer.
There you go. Oh, you see it? Can you see it too?
Yes, sir.
You want to read it then? Go ahead.
Well, I've seen a few comments, and I was going to address those in the closing remarks. But yes, I'll read it. Let me see. Where is it now? Now that
I can read it if you
yes, sir.
Don't have it. But it just says, first, I need to point out a huge. What did you say that word is?
Misnomer.
Misnomer. Okay.
Yes, sir.
What does nomer mean? Misnomer.
Misnomer. It means just something that's misconceived.
Got you.
Right.
Got you. I don't know where that. Okay, but and that is calling this event a debate. How is this a debate? Many Black and brown students in MMSD and their families support or want SROs in the school. Their students are struggling and hyper vigilant all day long. They are under resourced, and teachers and staff are asked to do too much. Even MTI warned about pulling the SROs out of the schools before there were a specified number of counselors, social workers, nurses, behavior support experts, etc. MTI said to do that is to put our most vulnerable at risk, but currently there are fewer support staff than there were even before they pulled the SROs out. Do you have a response for that?
I would like for President Muldrow to have the last word from us. I just want to point out that I'm very careful about engaging in debates where people believe that they can speak for Black folk by propping up Black folk, saying that the chief is a Black person and he supports this, or saying just just anecdotally that most Black people support this or that. I'm very careful to respond to those things. I happen to know empirically most Black people do not support SROs in this particular district, and simply because the chief is Black and supports SROs doesn't mean that it's particularly a right thing to do. We're talking about institutions and processes rather than people, and so maybe I'll just leave it at that and let President Muldrow close this out.
Thank you so much for your response to that. I don't think I could have said that any better, David Hart, than to say, I think the misconception, we listen to people, a majority group of Black people come to the school board for 2 years asking that we remove police officers from schools. I've never seen a large swath of the Black community show up at board meetings and say, bring the police back. I also haven't seen MTI. MTI has no problem coming to the school board and saying, hey, this is what we want, this is what we need. They recently came to the board over and over again and advocated for an increase in pay for the lowest paid workers, who are majority folks of color. When you're talking about our SCAs and our EAs, they have no problem advocating for what they want in our schools. They didn't mention that they wanted us to bring the police back. So I think the idea that the school board is out of touch with MTI, when MTI came out and said, right after George should be removed from schools because we're worried about the impact they have on our students, we had the ability for the first time to align at every level of our organization, meaning our educators, our board of education, our superintendent. We were all in agreement that practice was the practice of policing and criminalizing children in schools was no longer okay in Madison. And we were going to end that practice, and we did it together. And I'm proud of that. And I think there are major implications and major consequences of that decision that we all have to address and we have to take incredibly seriously. So I don't want to make anybody feel like we're ignoring the concerns that folks have. But I think it's a really important thing to understand that this wasn't a decision that we made as a board overnight, that there were people who advocated for this for years. And the majority of those folks were young people of color.
I appreciate you guys. I really do. I appreciate everything that you guys have discussed. Thank you to all the viewers who wanted to take the time to come and hear what we had to say. Again, I want to say thank you to David Hart, to Ali Muldrow, our president for our school district. Man, we greatly appreciate you guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Thank you, President Muldrow.
Oh, thank you so much, David Hart, for joining me in this conversation. And Aaron, thank you for leading a really gorgeous conversation, and really the thoughtfulness of your questions and your willingness to bring your own experience into this conversation elevated the conversation. And I so deeply appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with you both and all of you who are listening.
Thank you. It was a blessing.